Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Series 1, The Peoples of Chult. I'm your guide, Graham, and this is Lore Diver, the podcast about lore, world building, and alternative takes on all the fun things that we talk about. In previous episodes, I have covered two of the more conventional peoples of Chult, those being the Chultan humans and the Dwarves of Chult. So tonight I'm mixing it up a little bit, and I'm going to be hitting two lesser known, lesser thought of peoples of Chult, the Batiri Goblins and the Grung, the Technicolor terrors of the jungles. And I mean that literally. They are Technicolor and awesome. We'll get into that in a moment. So, some of you may be thinking, yeah, goblins and frog people, what is there to them? There's a lot. In the case of the Batiri, there's a little bit of lore going into their background. In the case of the Grung, there's a lot of potential, even though they are a brand new entry into the game. So, kick off here with the history in the editions. And so we've got a cool split this round, with the Batiri appearing in 2nd edition as one of the peoples of Chult in the Jungles of Chult book, which is really impressive given the time. Like, it was 1993, the idea of playing, or not just playing, but the idea of even like including monster race as one of the peoples of an area is pretty out there, but they did it. There's no stats to make them a playable race or anything like that, but the idea that they're part of the peoples of the Jungle of Chult area is pretty impressive and very cool. So that's how they started in 2nd edition, and they were by far probably one of the most important parts of that book. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they were the main antagonists at many points and the main threat to the player characters. You know, past dinosaurs, past the jungle heat, and even past the undead and all that sort of stuff. They were that integral to the entire setting. So you'd think that would carry on into 3rd edition, but you would not be right. So 3rd edition sees the Batiri being reduced in scope dramatically and in variety. They go from being multicolored with the color of each Batiri determining what clan they're a part of, to just all being green. And with the absence of albino dwarves, as I talked about last week, they took the albino dwarves right out in 3rd edition. They're pretty much back to just being bog standard goblins. There's none of the cool stuff that was going on in the Jungles of Chult book, is still happening. And so, now they're just kind of oh yeah, they're just goblins that are really good at tracking. Go team. And then finally, at least in my opinion, this all fed into how they were depicted in 5th edition, because 3rd had quite a bit of influence, I feel, on how things would ultimately go, along with 4th. But these guys weren't in 4th. Nobody was. 5th edition sees them in my opinion, at their least interesting. They're pretty much reduced to just being dinosaur worshipping goblins, with really bad tactics, like that whole Batiri Goblins fighting stack. Just no. Stack a bunch of people up on one on top of each other and try to fight something is how every single person in that stack is going to die, killed by whatever they're fighting. It's ridiculous. And they're completely divorced from the cultural mosaic of Chult. They're just not a part of it anymore in any way, shape, or form. So, now moving on to the Grung. Like the Batiri originally, the Grung are a polychromatic operation. It's really cool. They're instead of having their color denote what clan they're in, it denotes their place within their culture. And they're also large. The Grung are fairly big. They're hang on. I think I've lost the thread here. Okay, I'm back on it. All right, so see, this is what happens when you don't read your notes immediately before, because you have to change your baby. But that's what being a dad is all about. So as originally presented, the Batiri, like the Grung in 5th edition, there we go, are a polychromatic operation. Instead of having their color denote their place in their culture, it's what clan they're a part of. They're also big. They are averaging 120 centimeters, 4 feet tall, and they're weighing in at 80 pounds, which is, 36 kilos. That's pretty big for a goblin. Like, that's the size of a halfling, sort of thing. They worship dinosaurs. They dominate the jungle, like literally dominate the jungle. And in one case, the Dimetrodon clan has actually ceased to be nomadic and is now heavily involved with the albino dwarves. And when I mentioned earlier that they were the main antagonists, I wasn't kidding. Like, these are goblins that were up to 7 hit dice in 2nd edition, so it's the equivalent of being a 7th level character, which is a serious jump for like any goblin sort of threat if you're used to fighting goblins as they're usually presented in the game, which is more or less as a pop-up target for the adventurers to kill at any level above like 3. So Grung, on the other hand, these are brand new into the game, and insofar as I can tell, I haven't been able to find anything on them previously. There are some other frog races, the Bullywugs and the Gripply, and they'll get mentioned later. But they're brand new to 5th. They make their first appearance in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which came out before the Tomb of Annihilation, and they're more or less just cut and pasted right out of Volo's Guide to Monsters and into the Tomb of Annihilation. And there's not a lot of lore, which is a little bit surprising, because Volo's Guide to Monsters, a lot of the stuff in there, like, they dug a little bit into the lore of them, but in this case they didn't. It was more or less just a very basic entry that said, hey, these are little poisonous frog people. The gods must hate us because they live in trees and they're poisonous. What can we do? Bleh. And I'm not satisfied with that. Like, that's like, oh boy, that doesn't mean anything to me at all. But there's a lot we can extrapolate from their culture, their habits, and preferred lands that they live in that actually ties them into the deeper lore of the Forgotten Realms. So, history and the current state in the campaign setting. There's actually only one historical date mentioned for either group, and that is minus 120 Dale Reckoning, which is roughly around when the Tabaxi Shoei War is at its peak. The Thinguth have been vanquished finally after thousands of years of fighting, and there's a mention that that because of the loss of life and loss of control over Chult resulting from this war, that it gives the Batiri Goblins the opportunity to expand and become a dominant power inside the jungle. So basically, if it's not human controlled, if it's not dwarf controlled, it is goblin controlled. And that's it. That's the only historical mention at all. No idea what's going on with that. Well, I do. They're goblins, and until relatively recently, most the D&D games moving forwards did not think that people wanted to play them, so they just didn't pay a lot of attention to them at all. So, the next point of history is around 1491 Dale Reckoning, and I say around because, insofar as I know, 1491 is the last concrete date that there was for any of the books coming out. Maybe 1492. Don't know. However, this is where the Grung are effectively introduced into the game as a effectively as a unique minor monster for the players to deal with. And as I said before, in effect, with the Tomb of Annihilation book, the Batiri and the Grung are just pop-up targets for the players to deal with little, if anything, to distinguish them or to indicate them their deeper connections to Chult, the peoples, any sort of like lore, history, or anything else like that, aside from the fact that they eat and or enslave other humanoids, which is a thing that they do. So that's actually worth talking about here for a moment, and that is that the Batiri Goblins are described as cannibalistic. However, they immediately note that the Batiri Goblins only eat other humanoids. They never eat other goblins. So they're not really cannibals. They're just not particularly discerning about the other things that they are eating. And not just that, but like within the larger context, it really puts things into perspective for like how desperate things can get in the jungles of Chult, and competing for food and stuff like that, and that a group is just going to eat whatever sort of strays across their path. Um, and building on that, the Batiri in these previous editions, they really went to town. Like if you have a chance to sit down and actually read through the Jungles of Chult book, it is packed, literally packed with snippets about the Batiri Goblins. It talks about how the albino dwarves respect them, work with them, trade with them, and do a whole bunch of other stuff that like dwarves just do not do with goblins at all anywhere else in any other setting that I am aware of. It talks about how dangerous they are. Like they are a major threat. Like they get treated as more dangerous than orcs in the north throughout the entire book, and that's pretty wild. Like goblins usually don't get that amount of attention or that amount of power given to them, but here they are in Chult. Like they are the power. There's like they've got war drums. They dominate the landscape. People specifically try to avoid them. Unless you're an albino dwarf, in which case you've somehow managed to cut a deal with one group, particularly the Demetrodon clan, the Green Men, as they were called by the Sorials, to like do business with them, and you're actually like resulting in a change in their culture. And I'll get into that a bit in the takes. And with the Grung, like I don't know about anybody else, but I get kind of tired of the whole, well, this is an evil race, and so they capture and enslave other things and make the slaves do everything, being pretty much their core driving thing, like their motivation for interactions with literally anything else. I think it's really dull. I think it shows kind of a lack of creativity, and it's yeah, I got a comment there. Yeah, it does seem to pop up a lot with evil races. It absolutely does. It like I'm fairly certain that at least 2/3, if not 3/4, of the like evil aligned races all have like capture slaves as like their main reason to interact with other groups on the planet. And with the Grung, it actually doesn't make sense. Because only one, I think there's one type of the Grung, I think it's the gold ones, their leadership caste can actually, like their poison has kind of a charm sort of effect. And otherwise, I mean, they're tiny. Like they're little frog people that prefer to live in trees and who guard the ponds that they spawn in. They don't have a huge need for like a slave based anything. I mean, what are they going to do with them? They're not farming. They're not building things. They're not doing anything. They're not even like using them for food or anything. It's just kind of like, hey, we're evil. We got to have slaves if we're evil. And what do you do with your slaves? I don't know. We just sort of keep them dopey and poisoned. It doesn't make sense to me. These little tree frog people need to keep slaves for what? Like, anyways. So that's all for that part. And this is actually, that's probably the fastest that I'll be able to go through like a history and editions and current state of the campaign setting, because the next set of races is going to be some really deep dives into some stuff. Let's see, we got a comment here. Slavery is hopefully universally seen as bad, so it's a good way of saying adventurers not to like them. Yeah, it's a pretty worn out trope. Yeah, exactly. It is a pretty worn out trope. Like it's one of those things where like, if there's a reason to like for the evil race to have slaves, like hobgoblins, for example, they use slaves as their agricultural base and to do all the junk work, like the crap work they don't want to do. It makes sense that they're a slaving race. They're evil. They need slaves to power their evil empire. Okay, that makes sense. Little colorful tree frogs that just want to protect their pond that they spawn in, and a tree. That doesn't make sense. So now we get to have the fun part, and this is my take on like how things could be done with these particular groups. And there's a lot to get into here because there's a lot of cool stuff. So first off, like with the Batiri, go back to the classic appearance and stylings. Like maybe change their clothes up or something like that, but move away from the really boring, like, they can't make cloth, they don't know how to cure hides, so everything is rotting off of them all the time. Like sort of ditch all that stuff. Go back to the classic appearance and have them be a functional group, because they're clearly not normal goblins, so why import all this normal goblin stuff? So here, mind flayers use people as their food. Absolutely. That makes sense. Then, well, not so much slaves as livestock, which is even grimmer somehow. Anyways, so back to the Batiri. That older look, it's much cooler. They're bigger, they're more functional. That 4 feet tall, 80 pounds, that's awesome. Okay, polychromatic complexions, absolutely. Like, bring that back. That's cool. Being able to tell on sight, like, okay, that this is a person from the Dimetrodon clan. This is a person from the Stegosaurus clan. This is a person from this clan. That I dig that. Get rid of battle stacks. It's a terrible tactic. It's like somebody was playing too much Super Mario World and liked Pokey the segmented cactus too much. It's not an effective tactic. It's less effective when you're fighting in thick jungle. Like the only use I could possibly imagine for that particular tactic would literally be stacking up to get an archer to a higher position to shoot an arrow into something. That would be sort of effective. Otherwise, like using that for melee combat, that is how a lot of goblins are going to die. The next, let's see here. People are such a terrible crop. I mean, it takes a lot of resources to keep humanoids alive. The input-to-output ratio is heavily weighed against keeping humanoids, so you can feast on a 5-pound mass of meat and fat. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Humans are bad crops. We are resource intensive, and like we're not even a perennial. Like, you have to get new ones every year. Next up, expand on the non-standard nature of the Batiri Goblin culture. Yes. So, the Batiri Goblins, as presented, are generally ruled, each clan is ruled by a queen, who is assisted and advised by a head shaman. Well, that's cool. It breaks away from pretty much everything else goblins do that I've seen elsewhere in D&D, and it's a fantastic combination. Not to mention the fact that, if you have Batiri, like queens and shamans and all that sort of stuff, that implies that there's also going to be at least some form of diplomacy going on between the clans, and perhaps through groups like the Dimetrodon clan, even diplomacy going to groups outside of the goblin clans, to sort of establish borders, boundaries, all that sort of stuff. Important things when you're competing for resources with dinosaurs in a jungle that is filled with the undead. So yeah, like, I expand on it, grow that concept, make it better, make it bigger. Because like we're talking, like, I think like the shamans were like 7-hit dice in the original book, and like the queens were 5-hit dice, and so those are powerful goblins. Like, those are, like approaching mid-level adventurers in their capabilities. So absolutely, like, build that up. Next, what about the Dimetrodon clan? So the Dimetrodon clan, this was the clan that I talked about briefly in the last episode, that had effectively allied themselves with the albino dwarves, and that is awesome. They're called the Green Men because they were the green Batiri, and like, they were on their way to starting like a whole new goblin civilization. I mean, they were working with, trading with, interacting with, and being around dwarves to the point that they'd given up being nomadic and were like building settlements and building a permanent presence. And like in Chult, that's difficult to do. Like, it's hard to do in any sort of jungle setting. Like, if you look at any like real world jungle civilizations, like establishing any sort of like a permanent home in a jungle is incredibly difficult. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of effort, and like you have to be doing it. It has to be for like a good reason. You can't just be like, oh yeah, this seems like a nice area. We'll hope we'll survive. So like things I would like to see with that, like have them do it. Like have that goblin civilization in Chult. Like that's awesome. It's different. There's nothing else like it anywhere else. You know, give me those dwarf goblin hybrids I talked about. I still think that's a thing that could and should happen. Uh, where could you put them? The Valley of Lost Honor. It is an area that is avoided by humans generally because the Chultans have some, you know, understandably deep cultural aversions to going back to a place where they committed a giant war crime. Um, and it's mentioned at several points that Batiri Goblins seem to live there quite easily. And so you could have them, it's essentially building their civilization on the ruins of the most horrible thing that the humans have done in Chult. Have them being still close to the albino dwarves. Maybe you've got albino dwarf refugees living in and amongst them now. After all those fire newts came up and drove them out of their. Let's see here. I'd love to read the autobiography of the goblin leader that managed to convince their clan to do. Yeah, exactly. So, they're still close to the albino dwarves, as albino dwarf refugees are living in their settlements and in their, maybe they're up to city level, or maybe they're just like really well fortified towns or something like that. But you'll have albino dwarves living there. They're getting ready to help the albino dwarves take back their mines, because let's give some agency to the character or to the groups in this area. They want their homes back. A whole bunch of weird fire newts came out of the lava, took their homes. Well, we got to go put a plug in that lava, and these goblins who have been helping us for years are going to help us do this. So that's awesome. The other thing is new gods. So living so long under Abteo's watch seems to have cut them off from the regular goblin gods, which is net a good thing. The goblin gods aren't particularly great to follow, mostly because they're I believe they're under the sway right now of the hobgoblin's main god, and so that god is all about like regimented life and like sorting things out to like make the hobgoblin war machine work better so goblins can conquer the world. These guys, like, they're worshiping dinosaurs and jungle spirits, which technically makes them Abtao worshippers, because Abtao left a whole bunch of bits and pieces of himself in Chult that fragmented into these little spirits. So it adds something to it, and it leaves them open to new gods. Even if you went the route of the 9 trickster gods, which are at least in my opinion, were less trickster gods and more spirits on the verge of becoming gods, which would be awesome. I know I'm saying awesome a lot today. I don't know why. It's weird. Anyways, so I think that having this potential for new gods in the mode of these trickster gods is a good idea. It expands on the idea of the trickster gods. It expands on how gods could come to be in the Forgotten Realms, and adds a little bit more like uniqueness to the operation, because not only is it this new goblin civilization that's developing in the Valley of Lost Honor, but they also have their own new gods and own new belief systems developing with them. And to me, that just adds a whole new dimension to the operation that makes the place more interesting. It makes Chult a place that is more attractive for long time play and as a place to be from, not just a place to go to in game. So, and the other thing is that putting this goblin civilization into Chult, based around the Dimensionon clan or perhaps any other clans that joined them, gives potential for a goblin-centric rival to ally with or against the Chultans. And that's good, because for one, like, if you go the ally route, nobody wants to be eaten or enslaved by the Yuan-Ti. Like, nobody wants to have their watch their civilization get taken over by the Yuan-Ti and have everybody watch all their people get turned into purebloods or be eaten by abominations or anything else like that. Like, that's no way to live your life. And so that's a good reason for them to become allies. It's a common enemy, and they already have one group that's friendly to both of them, the albino dwarves. So you have some links there to do that. If you go the rival route, well, they're literally a new civilization rising up in the jungles of Chult. They've got, they have their own technology, they have their own magic, they have their own gods. They're doing all this stuff, so they're able to better, operate. It ceases to be a situation where it's sort of standard D&D. Oh yeah, there's goblins out there. I think they have a kingdom or something. And it becomes like, yeah, there's a goblin kingdom, and they are a legit threat to us because they are expanding, and there's not much that we can do about it because we cannot sort ourselves out to save our lives. Apparently, other things I'd give to them, I give them technological parity. So goblin smiths are about at human level. For expertise and ability within this theoretical goblin civilization. That solves a lot of problems right off the bat, simply because it means that their logistics and capabilities are matching those of at least the humans that are present in Chult. Whether they're matching those outside of Chult, totally different story, probably not, but it gives them something. And of course, it adds more fun to the jungle, running into, say, like friendly goblins. Or unfriendly goblins who are like, why are you in our territory? Get out. Otherwise bad things are going to happen. It helps break up the monotony of always having, and also, it's the monotony of always having dirty and unkempt goblins. Because I just get tired of that. I get tired of, this group's evil, so they can be, unkempt, dirty, whatever. Yeah, just break away from that, like, entirely. Just break contact, go a different route, develop them differently, make them neutral, because neutral can apparently mean just about anything. So, make them neutral or something like that instead of neutral evil or chaotic evil or lawful evil or something stupid like that. And, just have them trying to be and exist and reacting to the world around them. So, that's That's them. That's the Batiri Goblins. Now it's time to talk about the Grung, and this is all extrapolated out of the deeper lore of the Forgotten Realms at this point. So the Grung are a fantastic tie back to the Batrachi, and the Batrachi, they were the amphibian and Piscian fish creator race, and so I'm just going to talk about them for a second here. So. Within the Forgotten Realms, in its deep history that is frequently ignored, there were the creator races. There's the Aeri, which were an avian creator race who created also a bunch of the flying races and stuff like that. There is the Batrachi, who created bullywugs, Gripply, a whole bunch of the fish-based races, all that sort of thing. There were the Sarak, who I'll be going into detail with in coming weeks, who created all the scaly kind, everything from Asabi and lizard folk to Yuan Ti and troglodytes, all that sort of stuff. That's all their handiwork. And they ruled the world during the Days of Thunder. Let's see, you got a thing here. It's like how the early Christians thought. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, comments here on the cleanliness and uncleanliness of things. Yeah, absolutely. So the Batrachi, though. The Batrachi were a huge empire. Like they all had big empires. They fought wars and stuff. There's a few others. Another creator race that's not really well identified. That's mammalian. But these are the ones that we know a lot about. And the Batrachi were primarily amphibians. They dabbled a bit in ocean stuff, but they did, frogs, salamanders, all that sort of stuff. And they seem to have loved making things to fill specific tasks and having hierarchies within things. And they were such a massive power that at one point they actually challenged the giant empires, like the Giant Kingdom in the north, went to war with the Batrachi during the Days of Thunder. And, pardon me, the war was actually going fairly well for the Batrachi until their head, I think it was their head cleric, was killed. And after that, things started to go sideways. And then that's where the lore gets muddled, because some lore says that they cut some primordials loose to help fight a battle, and everything went sideways. And then the one confirmed, and then the Sun Elves and their sundering that goes back and forth through time comes back and slaps that era as well. But the one thing that is confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt is that a large object or objects from space struck the planet and turned the 4 inland seas into the Sea of Fallen Stars, which exists to this day in the game, and it radically altered the climate of the planet. Then let's see, I got a comment. Imagine that primordials, things are going sideways. Yeah, I guess sideways can possibly be when you decide to release, the enemies of the gods and hope that's going to work. Which just leads to a whole bunch of other questions about the gods themselves, but that's for a different set. That's for a different series. Is trying to sort out the nightmare that is the theological cosmology of the Forgotten Realms. Anyways, so the climate changes, and the Batrachi their empire disintegrates rapidly, leaving little pockets of amphibian people all over the place. And, I talked about how, there's hierarchies and specific tasks is what they liked. And the same as the Yuan-Ti scream bioweapon to me. And I'll talk about that more when I do the episode on the Yuan-Ti. The Grung do the same thing. They feel like me. They feel to me like a biological weapon. They were something that the Batrachi created during their war with the Titans. Specifically to be assassins and possibly saboteurs, which would explain the different effects of their poison they have, and also why their poison is touch based, because it's the easiest way to deliver it. They're small, they can get into all sorts of places. They could just very easily go for a swim through the drinking, through the reservoirs or something like that, or they get into I don't know, the brewery for the giants, and take a swim through the beer or something like that, and all of a sudden you have effects happening. So that's what the Grung feel like to me, and there's other connections to them as well. For example, the Batrachi were a warm, damp environment preferring race, and that's exactly what the Batrachi, or that's exactly what the Grung are going for. They're purportedly possible to encounter in any jungle or warm swamp area, and they have specific needs, much like the Batrachi. They have to have pools of water to reproduce. They cannot do it without. So they need pools of water. They need that warm, moist environment, all that sort of thing. And a lot of that was lost, after the Tearfall event, because the climate of the world changed to something roughly analogous to what it is now in game, and so dramatically fewer jungles, dramatically fewer swamps. The areas that they needed to live are all gone. Now, as to how they arrived in Chult, my suspicion, given that they were never mentioned before and they're a brand new addition to the edition, is that they most likely migrated to Chult during the reconstruction phase of the Second Sundering. So you have land rising out of the water, all that sort of stuff is going on, and that, in my mind, forms a natural highway. So you have Grung likely living in the jungles and wet areas all over the place in southern Faerun. All of a sudden, the Second Sundering starts, and there's all this fantastic wetland just appears out of nowhere. And it is like a highway for them. So they just go from east to west and nothing flat, and suddenly Chult finds itself with a new intelligent species living in it. And Chult is their dream environment. Hey, it's warm, it's wet, it rains almost constantly, there's pools of water all over the place. There's all sorts of things for them to utilize to, survive. And on top of that, they're relatively protected. They're poisonous to everything, and they're brightly colored, so they're letting the world know that they're toxic. And yeah, like that, just, it fits perfectly. It's awesome. Um, Now, here's, this is a little bit fun. I talked about this a little bit about it on Twitter the other day, and I could see them actually being joined. Like I like to put the player races in D&D into threes. So you have like gnome, dwarf, elf. You have halfling, human, Goliath, all that sort of thing. These guys fit really well in with the bullywugs and Gripply. So you'd have Grung, Gripply, bullywug, roughly following the sizing for halflings, humans, and Goliaths. It's a very analogous setting or setup, and in my mind, that adds more connections to them in that they know about each other. Perhaps they compete for terrain at times, or other times they are able to live together because they're aiming for different resources within the environments, all that sort of thing. And then another thing you can add into them is ancestral mythology around hating giants. Hey, giants were what they were created to fight. Giants were ultimately what caused the fall of the Empire. And they may not remember the Batrachi Empire. I mean, that's like 17,000... No, it's longer than that. That's like almost 19,000 years ago in-game. So that may just be like a very cloudy, hazy, oral tradition memory at that point. Where it's no longer, like, oh, we were assassins for the Empire. And, it's become... a more ambiguous or a more descriptively put concept. Can't think of the word for it right now. I'm sure it'll come to me. But they remember giants. They remember that they were the enemies of the giants. They remember that giants aren't their friends, and that adds a nice tie-in in the Tomb of Annihilation with a group of giants that's actually come south looking for the Ring of Winter. Because they are moored off one of the, I think they're off the southern coast or something like that. But the sudden presence of giants in Chult may set off all sorts of really cool, like, little alarm bells in them, as like their shamans and their wise folk bring up, these old legends, old myths, stories that are, so hard to understand now. That's not even funny, but they know that it means that they have to fight these giants. And at that point, now you start to get integration into the game setting. You start to get integration into the adventure that's presented. And you have a reason for them to actually interact with the larger world. Because as we already talked about, the whole, like, them needing slaves doesn't make any sense. But them needing allies to fight against giants does, because they were part of a cog. Or not part of a cog. They were part of a machine to fight them, and now other parts of that machine are missing. Oh, we have a question here. Wasn't that a setting of a book, The Frost Giants? Yeah, that was in the Tomb of Annihilation book, and it was also mentioned in the Storm King's Thunder. The Storm King's Thunder mentions, I can't remember if it mentions Artis Kimber by name, but it does mention the Ring of Winter and how the King of the Giants in the book has sent giants south looking for it, because I think it was something to do with Oral's chosen one, the Frostmane's chosen one, the one of the ring or something like that. And then in the Tomb of Annihilation, they're mentioned again because there's a ship full of what I imagine are very unhappy frost giants, suddenly in a tropical environment, who have been tasked with finding a human who has been alive for hundreds of years now, who is equipped with what is probably the most powerful artifact running around in the game. Like, with no word of a lie, the Ring of Winter, as it's been described, fluff-wise, is an insanely powerful artifact that, if used incorrectly or if let to run wild, will cause an ice age. And that's what Artis Kimber's running around with on his hand. So, the more you know. But, Grung hate giants. The Grung don't have their allies anymore. There's no bullywugs down here to act as their frontline warriors. There's no Gripply to act as their scouts and eyes and skirmishers and all that sort of thing. So they need assistance. They need humans or Batiri or dwarves. They need something in order to help offset these losses, and that gives a great reason for them to interact. All of a sudden, it's Port Nyanzaru, and a group of Grung show up. The card's like, what's going on? What's happening? Get me a wizard who can cast understand languages on these guys. I don't know what's happening. And they find out that they're offering treasure they've collected off of dead adventurers or something like that in order to come help fight these giants. There's an instant plot hook. So yeah, that's what I think about the Grung and the Batiri. I feel that they are much, much more than what they are presented as. The Batiri Goblins have the potential to be an entire goblin, like a nascent goblin civilization developing in the jungles of Chult, in the Valley of Lost Honor. Like, that's the sort of like cool changing things up thing that, at least in my observation, people seem to be looking for more and more out of Dungeons and Dragons, because the status quo is clearly not doing the job as well anymore. All you have to do is look at some of the amazing fan art out there to see what people are playing, and the days of human, halfling, dwarf, elf, half elf, maybe a half orc, those days are gone. Like, people are embracing all these different things, and they're looking for more nuance, they're looking for more excitement, they're looking for things to be a little bit different. And this offers a chance with the Batiri to give that little bit of difference without having it being a game breaking event or any kind of like such a bizarre entry into the game that it breaks the continuity of the setting. It would be a gentle event, as opposed to, say, 4th edition's shoehorning in of the Dragonborn. Like, that was literally taking like a square peg and pounding it through a round hole with a mallet, and then giving a thumbs up, like, yeah, we did a great job, smooth entry, it's perfect. No. But this is a nice, smooth, organic development of things that were present previously. And with the Grung, I just want more about them, to be perfectly honest. I don't find the information that's being presented as being satisfactory. Like, it's perfect if I'm planning an encounter, but for anything else, it's not really good, because it doesn't tie back into any of the deeper lore or any of the deeper history or anything of the setting. And I totally understand, it's Dungeons and Dragons, monsters can come and go, they can be, plug and play, all that sort of stuff. But when you have a setting like Forgotten Realms, where there are just so many possibilities and such a fantastic amount of deep lore to draw on, to simply drop a group like the Grung into the game and say, yeah, hey, I know there's some other frog people, but here's a new kind, and then not tie it into anything at all. That's just not on. Like, that's just not great world building. Because it's also depending on the individual players to have, or not just the players, but the dungeon masters to have a scope of knowledge they may not have. I mean, the books for Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms, there's hundreds of them. Between novels, like adventure modules, campaign setting information, all that sort of stuff. There's a ton of information, and like, to be honest, people just don't have time to read it all, and may not even know that stuff exists. Like, I routinely run into people who don't know that creator races are a thing, or who, to who the Days of Thunder are a completely new concept. The reason being that they're just not tied into the game very well, and the Grung are a great way to do that. They're fresh, they're in 5th edition, they're new, people like them. They're adorable little tree frogs that are multiple colored, and that are multiple colors, poison skin, and will shoot you full of arrows and or stab you if you mess with them. What's not to like? That's awesome. Um, but just tie them into the game. Get them into the setting and be like, yeah, they were created by the Batrachi. Oh, cool. What are the Batrachi? Well, the Batrachi are one of the creator races. They created this, and this. They fought the giants, blah, blah, blah. Just have that, that paragraph or two of lore, just to, bring it all together. And yeah, so that's my thoughts on the Batiri Goblins and on the Grung. Yeah, I had a little bit of a hiccup earlier in the episode there, but it happens. And so, what's going on for the next episode? Well, the next episode we are starting the epic, multi-layered, multi-part examination of the scaled races. And their creator race, the Suruk, and how it all ties in to Chult's pre-human civilization history and its modern day. Because, man, it's a lot. The Suruk in particular, they are deeply tied to just about everything in the Forgotten Realms and are active in the game in the modern age, and almost nobody knows about it or what they're up to. And their creations are all over the place. There are some of them, like lizardmen, are already available as, or lizard folk are already available as a player race. Same with the Yuan-Ti, but there's more. There's so much more. And in the south of Faerun, you can't kick over a rock without finding their influence. So that's where we're starting off with. That's what we're going to start off with next week, is the Suruk. Who are they? Why are they? What are they? And what's their effect on the bigger world? So that's what's coming up next week. So thank you very much for listening. This has been Lore Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you like what you heard and you'd like to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you'd like to support this podcast, there's links to my coffee on my blog and social media. And the music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.